This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded October 21st, 2022.
Dave, I am so sorry for getting you up this early. Are you doing okay?
Actually, yeah, I've been up.
Okay.
The trick with this time of day is that I'm usually heading back to sleep, actually,
Oh,
like that. But which is why I don't generally schedule it. But it's totally fine.
okay. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad it's not too much of a burden, and I appreciate you doing it because I really wanted to have an opportunity for the two of us to speak with Vukosi Marivate, a former PhD student of mine from Rutgers, who is back in South Africa doing some really interesting stuff. And because of time zones and whatnot, this was kind of the slot that was going to work for us. So I'm glad you could handle it.
No problem.
Outstanding. Well, Vukosi, how are you doing?
I'm good. I tend to actually live on a 24-hour life cycle, just because at the moment.
Wait, what does that mean?
uh,
I feel like a 24-hour life cycle means you're dead in a day.
uh, yeah. So we have twins. So they have
Oh,
a 16 months old. I'm also one of the program chairs for ICLR next year. So we also have to deal with, I think, 3 time zones. So we're always having this weird
oh my
messages
gosh.
coming in, dealing with lots of things, and yeah, and then still having to live life as a emerging professor at a university at the same time. So,
Right. That's a lot. That's a lot to be
yeah,
juggling.
yeah,
And I feel like you're also kind of at the cutting edge of some of the shifts in Africa
yeah,
in terms of really getting AI machine learning launching into kind of the main conversation that other people in the world are having. And I imagine
yeah,
that's also quite challenging, right? A lot of us
yeah,
get involved in research and we get kind of get dropped into this system that's been around for 50 years, and it's like, hey, this is easy. But it sounds like you guys are really thinking hard about how to structure things so that it will be possible to be productive and to generate results that will be beneficial. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that? So when we worked together at Rutgers, we were working on reinforcement learning and various kinds of machine learning stuff. We always had wonderful conversations about broader topics, but we didn't really work on them. What
yeah.
kind of shifts did you experience when you went off, let's say, on your own or away from me?
Sure. Yeah, so I think I started off with first promising myself 1 year of not working on reinforcement learning. That's how all of this started. I was like, okay, PhD is done. There were these topics that I'd also gotten very interested in at Rutgers. I think one was Tina Eliasirad's class on graph mining. And when I did that class at Rutgers, I got really interested in, like, oh, okay, fine, you can represent that, like, very interesting networks. But I used at that time Twitter analysis, but and I was just looking at what people were messaging each other. And I said, like, yeah, but I'm throwing away the text. So I'm not really analyzing what's in the text. I'm just keeping that people are messaging each other on that. So I was like, oh yeah, once I'm with this PhD in reinforcement learning, I will try and, like, because put my time into thinking about this. And that's where, yes, I did move more into, hey, how do you also make machine learning useful in places where there's a lot of, what is it, people involved. I enjoyed my PhD, I liked working and thinking about kind of theoretical spaces and a lot of, but it was like, okay, how do you actually get this to go? I think what you're saying is that in a lot of research, you think, like, my work might be used somehow down the line, but I don't really worry too much about the practicalities of how that's going to actually happen. Well, when I got back to South Africa, I rejoined the government research lab, the CSIR. And then through that, I'm working with, like, a government department. So there, it's like people asking you directly, like, okay, you're going to do
How is
this
this going to help
research.
us?
Yeah, how is this kind of going to help us? And that's where you miss, like, if being in the US or being in Europe, like, having large labs, having access to many people, and in one space, kind of on there, and having lots of practitioners. And through that, with a number of like previous acquaintances and friends and previous lab members of other labs I'd been on before I got into at Rutgers, we then started coming together and saying like, how do we actually like, kind of build up a better environment for researchers and give up opportunity. And that's where it started on thinking about, okay, how do you bring people together, get people to work, especially across organizations, and not worry too much about the incentive systems within their like, like, oh, I'm a university staff member at a specific university, so I get rewarded for doing things on, like, within this space of like, yeah, well, there's not enough of us for you to work in that way. We need to change the way that this works. So in some ways, that's how the deep learning in Daba in terms of an idea got started. And then we started going like, okay, how do you, like, also at the same time, we're seeing all these, like, tech being started to be really driven by machine learning, right? That you can see it's converting to dollars and it's becoming very big, but how is the representation of Africans, and also making sure Africans don't just become either data sources, or at the same time, it's just that technology is dumped on the continent and you're just supposed to use it in the way that it is, and you're actually not coming up with the next innovations. Yeah, so that's the kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it's like we're all becoming data sources. The question is, do we get anything back from it at all, or not? So what I'm hearing is, it's kind of like you got to sort of build everything from scratch, or more or less, and put together efforts from lots of different directions. Is there a overall sense that the mission is education, or is it supposed to actually change the world for normal folks in South Africa, or is it some multiple-headed thing? I mean, where does it point out? How do you know when you're succeeding?
Oh, that's a tough, very deep question. But I'll take my stab at it. So with the with the deep learning in Daba,
But can you just say, I think
off, on thinking
sorry, we're
about,
having audio issues. Wait, 1 second. I don't know if we can fix this technical thing, but there is a weird delay happening.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm getting some gaps too. I don't know if we're having. It might help to turn off video, or.
Oh, okay. Because from you, Dave, I hear you before I see you. So there's a big delay between your mouth moving and the sound.
Yeah, that may be all just my end, but I don't want to mess with it if we can.
Okay.
And.
All right. So do you want? Should we try no audio? So I've never been convinced. I know a lot of people do that, but I've never been convinced that the turning off the audio changes anything.
Turning off the video, yeah.
Videos, yeah. Sorry, turning off the audio would change a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, I did close one of the. I mean, I opened the door, which maybe there might be some interference with the Wi-Fi. So hopefully it's a bit more stable. Yeah. Okay. So
Vukosi, I was going to ask if you could introduce us to the machine learning and Daba, or deep learning, right? Because I think I think it's really important, and I don't know how broadly it's known.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So the deep learning in Daba is a grassroots AI organization, more kind of almost owned by the community. First started off with myself, people like Shakir Mohammed. He's at DeepMind. And Daniel Ulrich, I think, was a Microsoft Research, and a couple of other I had either been collaborators or had worked together in different spheres in the past, and then mostly at that time was South African, except I think Nyaleng Morosi was from Lesotho, and we were thinking about, hey, we have had people work in AI before on the continent. It's not that it's like, people aren't there. People were there, but being at Rutgers, I can think about having 50 or so PhD students residentially being available is a very different reality to what you kind of get in a lot of other places, especially on the African continent. We have 50 plus countries, but not that many practitioners. The universities are not as big, not as well funded in this space. So we thought, hey, how do we come up with something? Initially, we was thinking we can bring people together who want to come together do a summer school, had get top speakers. I think we had Nando de Freitas at the first one, for example, who himself had studied at the first university we went to. But the biggest goal was I think what we say in the mission is that we want to strengthen African machine learning, and it's in all ways. So it's not just the education,
right,
but it's also having better research, having better engineering within these spaces. And the reason being is that then people kind of can control their own destiny within this area. In the past, that's not the case, right? It's a lot of things of, hey, people come in with technologies and say, well, we developed it in Silicon Valley, you must just use it as it is. But that's not a good way to kind of grow the world at the moment. And we're learning that every day, especially in AI, because I think a lot of the people who are connected to these in these technologies also live very far away from the African continent or from Latin America, and they sometimes don't see the consequences of the systems that they're building or the research that they're doing.
So it's a full court press that you're aiming to get train new folks, do research, and just sort of have some agency within the sort of information technology area for South Africa and the institutions you work with. Is that sound right? I mean,
it's broader than South Africa, though. It's
way broader than South Africa. It's a whole continent.
I understand that's actually big, that continent. So people tell me that's big. It's so damn big. Okay. I mean, and again, that sounds absolutely right to me. And I am, very afraid of centralization, and I am very afraid of the amount of centralization that we've got. And I'm very afraid of efficiency, because people that are centralizing tell me that's what they get by centralizing. They get more efficiency. And so I want to see, 1,000 flowers bloom. I want to see folks figuring out all this stuff in whatever context they actually find themselves in. Are there, okay, so there's challenges of less resources and so forth. Are there other things that come to your mind, Vukosi, about that sort of makes it a little bit different in Africa, sort of makes the spirit of it different, or the way it unfolds, or anything?
So, we can talk about, obviously, application use cases, but then also the context is the thing that also brings in a diversity. As you're saying, centralization might look like, hey, we're being more efficient, but then what that normally is at the cost of diverse directions that people will take. So I think very recently I was talking to a few researchers, I think at MSR, and I was saying, like right now there's a big push of talking about machine learning at the edge. But I know a few researchers in places like Uganda who've been doing this for years, because it was actually a necessity.
Out of necessity, yeah.
Right. So it wasn't like, now it becomes
what an important. Interesting idea. It's like, how else could we do it?
Yes. Right. And that's the point. And with the Indaba, we were hoping then of saying, okay, there's one part to do better, research and teaching, but there's also this great opportunity for the AI and machine learning community to actually learn from also African researchers. How do we make sure they can also participate in a very kind of positive way? Because the other maybe side story to this of what really happened to spur on the last kind of bit of the dominoes falling of this happening was this discussion that was happening of like, hey, should NeurIPS be in Africa? I think there was this question about that of like, oh, we should just move it there. And then there were a lot of discussions. I remember it was a Twitter long DM thing with lots of different people of like, how does that make sense if there's not going to be much participation of local,
that's a catch-22.
Yeah, you're right. And so then there was this of like, but we could if there was other initiatives that were available to assist people, that could be great. And that's like some of the initial funding we got. I think probably Nando was in that conversation. I think Jan LeCun was probably in that. It's like one of those things. Probably have to archive that Twitter thread on that one. And that was like some of the things that really brought this. And And yes, we are also very cognizant of not using NURIPs as the metric to optimize for, because that's not necessarily also the correct thing. But that was the part, and I think if we look past 2017, which where the first Indaba was, I think for the AI community internationally, they've been better for it because they've met probably more Africans. They've seen more work coming from these spaces and also interactions, and also getting to learn what's actually going on. And then some people also then finding ways, like, finding their way onto the continent, into different countries, and seeing what they can do there, and also learning from those spaces. So it is a very interesting thing. And for me, it means also I have to travel across the continent a lot. So there's countries that I before never been into, but that's like part of now.
Right. And then again, it's
mission.
like, oh, but it's just Africa. But as Dave was pointing out, it's very, very big.
It's very big. Yeah. Yeah. I've been to like different corners now but and very also different things. And it's always very interesting because when you get there, like, you have to act at the moment. Sure, I'm getting to be a senior person, but it's really a servant to the community of figuring out, okay, what do you need help with? And what's the problems that you have? And then from there, trying to figure out with our network, what we can do for that community. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that people say is that well-intentioned folks who are outside of Africa, who want to help Africa, sometimes can be very clumsy about it because they don't really understand the culture. But I think partly what I'm hearing from you is that Africa is very big and there's multiple cultures taking place in Africa. Is that something that is troubling or difficult or challenge for you, even coming from South Africa to other parts of Africa? Do you get accused of cultural insensitivity or is there some, I don't know, is there some understanding? How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, it's a very insightful question, Michael. And yes, that is the thing. So South Africa, I'm going to use a number. So I think we do 0.83% of GDP per capita goes towards the research. So what this means is that comparatively to a lot of other African countries, some people might think like, oh, we don't have a problem. The US, I think, is probably 5 times more in terms of the total amount. And this is both from public and private funding. And it's a very interesting thing because I remember one time one of our keynote speakers saying like, yeah, let's not count South Africa in terms of fixing some of these problems, because at least you have the universities, there is some funding that comes from the public ministries and everything. But what then this means is, yes, it's meant every time I get asked questions about a country, because of with the Indaba, okay, the first one we had about 300 people. It was like, hey, at least we've proven that this can happen. And people were able to gather, show off work with poster sessions, learn through the tutorials. And we also then incubated an Indaba X, so borrowing from TEDx, hopefully we don't get sued.
I think X is available.
Right. Yeah, hopefully X is available. Of saying that this could be better represent the local sub-communities, right? Of having smaller workshops where they can reach more people. So if the Indaba in the first year could accommodate 300 people out of, I think it was close to 700 applications, which was also a proof of that there was actually a lot of demand. We then did, I think, almost 1,000 people
That's great.
in the first Indaba X rounds attending these local workshops. And we've worked over the years, there's been a subcommittee that works on just taking care of the Indaba X community to strengthen those communities. So you can ask me and say, hey, I'm interested in people in Benin who are working on AI. I can just say, hey, yeah, here's a few people to talk to in Benin, because they can give you a much better view than I can about what's actually going on in Benin, some of the things that happen there. There are common things that, across lots of countries. I work to learn that a lot of the senior people inside the Indaba work to understand those, because then when our conversations with people like yourselves, we can try to articulate this and then see how we can actually take those problems away over time. But yes, it is a thing of as I said, like more humbling yourself when you go to another country and listening, as opposed to first going there and saying, well, I can solve your problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't, it also
Doesn't work.
That
yeah,
never works.
yeah.
That
So
trick
yeah,
never works.
yeah.
Well, well, as I think back and forth between centralization and distributed and top down and bottom up and all these kinds of organizational strategies that seem to me to apply both to computational architectures and to people and societies and like everything, to think the idea is like maybe what we need to do is get NeurIPS, like the premier conference, to come to Africa. That's like one approach. That's like trying to go for all the marbles, take the centralization and get it to be, our thing, or, to bless it upon us or whatever, versus building bottom up and making an Africa thing. And then because it turns out Africa is kind of big, that you build sub things, X's and country specific, whatever it happens to be, stuff within it. And then you build up this layers of structure, layers of relationships, which to me seems like simultaneously the harder route in some sense, but the more robust route, the generally righter, better way to go. And it sounds like that's what you're doing with the community stuff and lots of things all over the place. Is there any kind of sort of semi-official, like hierarchical structure or something to get the locals to talk to other locals and then increasingly far away and so forth? Or is it all just, who knows who?
Yeah. So one of the things, even before the first endeavor, I think decided is that, yes, it's not about having one organization or one grassroots AI organization that's going to almost simultaneously or a year before at Data Science Africa was formed in the East Africa region. And before the main Indaba actually applied and then went to Tanzania to go see what was actually going on, and then talk about the Indaba, saying like, oh yeah, I see, you guys also started this community, and then we're having our thing in a few months in South Africa, so it'll be great. And then I also found people who had applied to the Indaba and were coming to the Indaba. One was Kathleen Simunyu, who ended up now, she's on the on the organizing committee of the Indaba. So she came to the first Indaba, and then after that actually joined the organizing committee, and she's from Kenya. So with this, we take the kind of the brother and sister organizations very seriously, and that's a way we can exploit some of the internal centralization of these communities, because we can talk to the leaders of these different organizations, the same way that we interact with Black in AI, which is like, being Black in the diaspora of AI, and that they've been really having like meetings always in parallel with NeurIPS every year, and we interact with them as well. And I've gone to NeurIPS to specifically actually be at the Black in AI event. And through that, it allows those I guess areas where ideas can jump from one community to another, because then they can also come back from top down, is like with the bottom up as well. And another one has been, interestingly, the other mushrooming of other sub communities. So fine, we kind of co-founded Deep Learning Indaba in 2016. First meeting 2017 with 300 people, grows to 600 people with over 1,000 applications in 2018. And by the time we get to 2019, we're around 650 coming to the main meeting, close to we're getting quickly to 2,000 applicants. Even this year we had 400 people at Tunisia, but then almost close to 2,000 applications. So again, the demand is very high. But in 2019, in the sub community that was there was starting to have workshops at the Indaba that looked at language. And specifically African languages and AIs and NLP on that part. And after that Indaba, it became like, okay, we're forming another grassroots AI organization that just looks at African languages, which was Masakani. And that's also made a lot of waves in the natural language processing community, because it was like, we can all be researchers in this large distributed lab.
Great.
of 1,000 researchers, which is, it has a Slack. The Slack has like almost 2,000 members. People come along. I think they have a community meeting every week. People just come and talk on like, oh, I'm thinking of starting this project. Here's the problem that I'm trying to solve, or like, trying to do research on. And then people just pile on and say, oh, I would also want to volunteer and work on that. And they work like, outside like these formal structures of universities or private labs or government labs, and they're producing work that ends up in the top conferences in language. So it's been very interesting. Yeah. And then so like, cool. Spurring on there. A year later or 2 years later now, there's one for AI and health. And the same things you see happening now in Latin America. There was Kipu, which is a directly inspired by the Indaba. So there's a meeting in South America now on this. And there's America's NLP, which then also now tries to look at natural language processing for South American languages. So it's been very interesting. As I said, we're happy to give back to the rest of the community.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't saying like, oh, let's isolate ourselves. It was actually saying, let's figure out a different way to do this.
Figure out as many connections as can be effective, I would think, for sure. So what is, or what was the state of NLP, natural language processing, in African languages? I mean, was it like completely terrible, or is it getting better now?
No, like there were people, there are people working on there. But then I think there was some interesting things of looking at, okay, what happens again when you go into incentive structures. So this is just an anecdote, and hopefully I won't get crucified. So if you think about, there's this conference called LREC, which is like for low resource languages. So sometimes people would submit papers into the other top NLP conferences, and then you'll be like, oh, I'm working on this low resource language somewhere in the world. And you might have reviewers say, oh, you should submit to LREC. And LREC only happens once every 2 years. Right? And it's like, no, it's not that I'm doing like bad
I'm doing great work. Yeah.
Yeah, but then, so it then meant that a lot of people were just choosing to work on English or work on the problems that the rest of the international community thinks are interesting, but might not be contextually for you in your country actually useful in a way. And at the same time, if you think about the position of preservation of language, us not working on our languages means that they die faster. Yes. And that's a very problematic thing, especially now when you started getting virtual assistants, you have the internet more and more feeling like it's monolingual. Right. And on that part. So there is some part of, we have a responsibility to work on these. And through now, I think the first big Masakane paper, which was published at EMNLP 2020 at the findings, it was on this, you can do participatory research that thinks about the community in full, and not just the AI researchers, but then also the people who are creating some of the data, annotating, the linguists that are part of this thing. And it's become a much more accepted way of doing this research. It's just that, yeah, sure, you have a paper that has 60 or 70 authors, but that's actually what actually really happens if you really want to push these things forward.
Right. I mean, so is it even a well-defined number, or sort of how many languages there are in Africa that are in active use? Or, I mean, is it 10 or 1,000 or?
It's a large number. So remember, when we talk about low resource language, it doesn't mean it's not spoken. So it might be spoken by thousands and millions of people.
Well, no, that count. Yeah. It's not billions. I mean,
yeah. But the problem is that the digital resources, especially for other people to be able to use it to create tools, are not as many. And that's where then, then there's that barrier of somebody saying, oh, I'm actually going to go and do some research in this area and then develop some tools that could be useful later. So, and on one, after things like America's NLP, Masakani NLP, I think Ghana NLP, many of these kind of have shown up, they've created data sets, they've created models and all those things. We then start seeing also a big take up of trying to then do better evaluations or better benchmarking that just doesn't cover English and Spanish and German, because now those resources are available. I think the thing right now that's a big discussion is it that the biggest actually benefactors of having these types of grassroots movements are actually the big tech companies, because now they're releasing all these models that have 200 or 300 languages in them. And that's like, there's a direct line between, now other people kind of created these tools. Now we can just kind of absorb
now we
them.
can suck them up too. Yeah. I mean, I can get pretty cynical about big tech, and that the problem is less. I think the problem is even less the tech and more the big. But here we are, and in some sense, it seems like there's hardly anything you can do. There's hardly a thought you can think. There's hardly a piece of work that you can't do that couldn't be, owned, taken over, monetized by big tech. And so then it's like, should we just not do it at all? Or should we just consider that an overhead, till the revolution comes, or what? And, and I'm not even sure what the answer is, but it sort of seems like not doing that, like letting all these, fascinating languages with their incredible history of, whatever it happens to be, the folks that live wherever the hell they live, letting those things go can't be the right answer. So we're going to have to figure out another way.
I think it's a big thing. And I think maybe the reason I brought it up is that I think it's going to be a very big discussion over the next about maybe 12 to 18 months. We're also within not just the African sphere, not the South America, but I think across the world.
Right.
And at the same time, we collaborate with researchers from everywhere, from the top universities, from big tech as well. Awesome researchers trying to also as with the cause and all those parts. But yes, we also then have to think about the systemic issues that are there. So today, for example, for my research group, we have a seminar that runs in the second half of the year. We had Skylar Wang, who's at Meta AI and had worked on the No Language Left Behind project with the created a model for large 200 languages, and he's also a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley. And he talks like he's a sociologist working on this on this project. And the reason, you see why they would have to bring in sociologists is to start thinking about these things of there's power asymmetries, and these are going to become a bigger and bigger problem over time. For us, it was a great seminar. A lot of questions that were asked within there. But it's something that's kind of there are people on the extremes of either, hey, we should completely cut things off, or we should just work in the open. I think the solution is somewhere in between. We just have to work our way through the awkwardness of talking about it.
Right.
It seems to me that right. So big tech has issues, as you're pointing out, Dave, but it's also the case that they could do things better or worse, right? So they can be very heavy-handed about it and say, no, we're providing things free for the world in English, just, use it. Or they could be better and say, okay, well, we're going to try to support all these different languages and absorb them into the Borg motto, right? Your biological, your biological and technological distinctiveness will be part of the collective now.
Right, and that's better than extinction.
That's what I'm saying.
Is the Borg proposal like that? We're supposed to be happy about that.
Happier. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's got a German truth. It totally does, but then it's got the pay the piper side of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, finally on Google Translate, my father's language, which is Xitsonga, showed up this year.
Wow.
And I was like, hey, at least our work is not it's not for naught.
I mean, does it do a pretty good job, or is it super terrible, or what? If you
sometimes I tweet some of the weird things that it still translates, but it's better. It's better than some of. I remember, I think Facebook was probably the first one I saw a while, and then I used to and Twitter. Tweet some of the edge cases where it does things that are weird. There were some, but then the point is, at least now there's something to critique, and people are critiquing it and going
And my guess is that it would be not as good as the high resource languages are now, but probably better than the high resource languages were 20 years ago, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because it was translation was terrible. And
Yeah.
so the fact that it's sort of, leapfrogging up the chain, even though it's hard to imagine how it would do as well as English.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
No,
I mean,
it's very true.
it seems like the story of information technology, part of the story should be this kind of mass customization idea that part of what we can do is we can afford to support all the languages that are out there, or most of them, because we have this automated flexibility like that. And so to some degree, again, except for the fact that there's this implied centralization, this
Right.
implied
Well, and
everything goes through the center.
And there's a tension, right? Because I think the reason that these companies got so big in the first place is because of the ability to scale, to be able to say, we're going to do one thing and then project it everywhere, because we don't have to develop a zillion different versions of it. And
Right.
so I think it's a
That's
little
true.
bit baked into their DNA to try to think, okay, how can we not be diverse, right? How can we, you're calling it centralization. I think that's not unreasonable, but essentially the idea of scale, of being able to say, we're going to put in a small amount of effort and have it project over a large space.
Instead of scale, I would say leverage. The idea is that you're going to try to amplify some small little thing into some huge impact like that. And scale, I want scale all by itself not to be evil. It's just how you scale. And, if you scale by making alliances laterally and creating a bigger alliance, that's different than if you scale by saying everybody speak English, go, like that. And that, well, again, the evil is efficiency. The evil is loss of diversity, a loss of redundancy in the name of efficiency. I understand that people disagree with me on that.
So Vukosi, one of the things I remember a lot about our conversations back at Rutgers was that you have a really interesting attitude toward the complexities of real life, that you recognize the difficulties, the challenges, the things that people are going through, the systemic problems, but you don't seem to let it get you down, right? To just be depressed about it. You just kind of keep marching forward. And I saw that in you as a grad student, but it sounds like you're bringing some of that same attitude toward your professional work as well. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think I'd live. I think I'm trying to remember who for us to do great things, you have to have optimism, and I guess working in reinforcement learning, when you have a lot of uncertainty, you definitely have to be optimistic.
Right. Otherwise, you crawl into a corner and stop. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a very important thing for me, of saying look, if we went back to 2016, 2017, and we were thinking about doing this. I remember, so there's Benjamin Rossman, another person in reinforcement learning. He's at Brett University now as a professor. He had gone to Edinburgh, did his PhD there, came back to South Africa as well. And then there were other people who were starting, the young professors in South Africa in those spaces. If we had sat there and just accepted everybody who was telling us no, of this doesn't make any sense to us and it won't work, yeah, sure, we could have just left it and then said I'll just focus on myself and just making sure I survive this space, or leave South Africa, or leave the African continent in general, and just move to Europe, or move to North America. But the point was, we think this can work, and we're just going to be unreasonable. and just stick to our guns. So one of the things that maybe in North America people don't realize is people go we have big tech companies in South Africa at that time, and they'll be what do you mean? We have your big Microsofts, your Google, your Facebook, but all of their offices here, especially at that time, were just business and legal, right? Because that's the thing that they wanted to do. That's, you just want to sell your product, and then just make sure, you don't want to get into trouble with the law. And then when you explain this to you, I was it actually has practical implications. So when you think about a AI conference, in most cases, it was meant to be a corporate conference where it was, you're going to sit and people are going to sell you things for 2 days.
Right.
Right. It wasn't about, oh, we're going to talk about research and talk about cutting edge and how we can build on top of each other's research. So when we started doing fundraising in 2016 and 2017 for the first meeting, it was very hard because you would ask and then people would be like, oh, so how does our managing director here give a keynote speech? And they
Right.
were like, oh, is he an AI expert who's going to talk about some new methods? And it wasn't. And then we were like, oh no, yeah. And then we were like, no, we're not going to compromise on our scientific program. And that was a problem. And it's still in some ways a problem because the biggest funders that we have are still not from African organizations. And that's my next kind of big wall that I want to take down, is to say 51% of the funding that goes into these grassroots AI organizations on the continent should really be local, because that's a way also to think about that stability and sustainability. At the moment, sure, it might be getting money from the large corporates, from large donor organizations, because they can see it now. They can see that this actually is growing and at such a pace and all those things. But we also have to think about, it's not just about getting that money, but it's also getting the recognition that these communities are really impacting the lives of people locally. And through that recognition of partnering with funding organizations in their countries, that will be something that's more useful for them.
Right. And I guess, you want to keep a majority in some sense local, in some sense, to preserve agency, to preserve really having a voice and sort of not be able to be bought out by Microsoft, Facebook, whatever it happens to be. That's always a challenge. So it takes a lot of energy and a lot of, I guess, like Michael and you're saying, optimism to keep going at it like that. But I mean, it sounds like, from the point of view of building and maintaining structure at local scales, where local scales means, your kids and the family all the way up to Africa, you're making lots of progress, doing pretty well. I mean, that sounds good. Do you feel good?
I in some ways you feel spent. That's I think. Wait. No, sorry. One of the twins just came in. Hey.
I heard you were talking about me.
Okay, they're gone. Oh, second one is coming in now.
That's the thing about twins.
Yeah. So another maybe let me finish this. So the way I think about it, and maybe that's connected to the optimism, is that, let's say now a new researcher or faculty member a few years ago would have thought oh, there's 1,000 problems I have to solve just for me to do my research. Right. I view my work, and hopefully some of the other people who I work with in these spaces, a lot of them, is to say, okay, what if we reduce those problems by 80%? At least now the next generation just has to worry about the 200. Right. And if they reduce them, they get to a point where almost parity of being able to just focus on some of the things that are on there. The other clarification was I don't even it's not about thinking just about big tech, but that it's also, there's big countries that development agencies that give money. There's also other universities in other countries that give a lot of money, and they also it makes sense for them. It's the reason we do it is that there might be some strategy that we want to, and then we've got these things that we want to fund, and as such we will just say, this is the thing we're funding, and if you're not doing this, we're not going to fund it. And this, as you're saying, it takes away some of the agency. And sometimes I gave the example of, really think about what happened during COVID, where a lot of funding organizations just said, hey, that thing we used to fund, we're going to stop that for the next few months. We're just funding COVID related things. And then you're like, is that the right thing to do though? But they did it. And how many papers were written about COVID? But a lot. Were they useful?
Some of them.
Not the majority.
Well, but the point is, you want to be able to have some confidence you can make commitments on the funding for those months that are just no, like that. So it's challenging. But I mean, at some level, it's challenging for everybody except for the super oligarchs behind the scenes that run everything. It's just sort of there's bigger, many more degrees of how much you have to fight to actually keep your organization healthy, and your relationships with your neighboring organizations. But of course, now we got Michael, so we got him dug in the center of the whole thing now.
What is it? Yes.
So NSF going to be sending money to Africa now, Michael?
Well, it is the National Science Foundation, where nation means U.S. But
It doesn't say it. It's there are nations over there.
So we to be honest, we do a fair amount of government to government relationships. I was in a meeting yesterday with Ireland, which was kind of cool, like a sitting at a table where there's little baby flags for the two countries. I felt like like a diplomat. And so I can talk to the folks to see what are they doing in Africa. I don't even know.
I mean, certainly I know NSF has done a bunch of stuff with European analogs, the European Esprit and all those other kinds of organizations they have. I mean, there ought to be a line going into Africa the same way.
Yeah, I suspect there is. I will make that an agenda item for me to find out.
All right.
No, they should be. So one of my previous lab mates, who was senior, who was a PhD student while I was a master's student, he's now the CEO of the National Research Foundation in South Africa.
Wow.
And they have connections to the NSF, definitely.
Right. So it's got to. I knew it had to be there.
It's definitely, and there might be then other connections, obviously, to other science funding organizations across the continent. But then yes, obviously there'll be the NRF is like the largest on the continent, so that's also makes sense as a way to have those connections. But yeah, that's a whole interesting other, what is it? Science. What is it? Michael is a science diplomat.
Science diplomat.
Right. Science. That sounds right. That seems like something we need more of, actually.
That's probably true.
Like that.
So Vukosi, are there projects that you didn't tell us about that are bubbling up, or there are things that you can't tell us about but are bubbling up?
No, so we're for me, my research group has been pushing. I think we run this group called Data Science for Social Impact, and the reason that name was chosen was at the beginning was almost 50-50 on looking at language and then looking at how do you make data science, machine learning, AI actually practical for people to be used. So on that side, this Data Science Society, I have students who work on things like education, on health, and then really also, we also write papers and also try to impact policy as much as possible. So that's science diplomacy thing. And then, but then the language thing, because of, we've had an explosion over the last few years, and apparently, hopefully not too many people think that, large language models will bring us closer to AGI. That's not why we're doing it. But that also meant there's a lot of more interest in working in those areas, and we are making I think a dent in that area. So we've really pushed, and we've spent the last year. We got a Google Research Award that allowed us to actually just focus on finishing and kind of wrapping up a lot of work on South African languages, so that we can start focusing more and more on more kind of crossing the boundaries into other African countries and seeing that. Not that we haven't worked on that before. It was just like, hey, now I can actually prove a whole pipeline. And I just want to do it for all South African languages, so that when I go out there, people don't critique you and say, but you are South African and you're not doing anything for our language. We've got we've done
whole
it.
Damn continent.
There's a whole continent to go for on that one. So that's been something very interesting for me. And I sit on now a committee that's trying to write the AI strategy for the continent, and that's also been fascinating. We don't have little flags, but it's very interesting every time you're in a meeting, and then what kind of things come up as being something interesting. I think in the last meeting was us talking about energy and GPUs and data centers. I was saying a lot of the African continent does not have kind of meet the energy needs of its citizens. So now just imagine writing in a strategy that you need more data centers and fiber, so that you can make sure you can train train machine learning models, while at the same time people literally don't have light at night. And that's think about that, of saying so how do you navigate that and then figure out how so it might be saying, okay, is that then a priority that we should take in the strategy that's being developed, or we should find other ways that people can still access some of infrastructure if they need it, but it doesn't need to be in places where really the energy, like, really energy poor. That doesn't make sense. Like, to do that, and it's also not a good way for scientists to interact with the communities, their local, or say, like, yeah, don't solve that, like, don't solve the hunger issue. Like,
Right.
we need GPUs. Yeah, it
No,
does. So
that seems
yeah.
smart.
Yeah, so that's also an interesting thing, and sometimes you want to pull your hair, because yes, also you means that you have to be political in the way that you interact with things, and you're trying to say, like, we need to do this now, not in 5 years.
Yeah. Well, I think especially when we go to, American universities and we get to do this pure research crap, nobody wants to be political. I mean, if you enjoy doing this abstract science stuff, you just want to do that.
Yeah.
But, inevitably, if you're actually going to make any difference in the world, I mean, unless you got E equals MC squared and you're done, then, everything gets political. So it's just a matter of choosing whether it's something that you care about enough to spend your time getting political and doing what it takes to try to move it down the field. And it sounds like, you've got South Africa, all of Africa, a continent that you're trying to move stuff down the field on. And so you say, okay, so it's the politics you'll choose to work on, even if it's as frustrating as politics is everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing sometimes I try to teach when I'm teaching in our master's in data science program, of like sometimes we stay away from these places, but it's fascinating to do. I worked for a bit with the city that I live in, and like thinking about what actually a problem is. It's like, oh yeah, there's machine learning, but then you have to figure out, like, I say, like, people are the problem and the solution. You have to figure out, like, where the people are in this whole system, and then, like, you find like, oh, they've been trying to figure this out themselves. It's just that they might not have kind of the technology down in the way that they want, and then it's like we can come in and start thinking about it better with them. But you don't drop technology in. It just doesn't work. And in there, and then you have to be like, I know some scientists even in South Africa look down on that, or they might like look at like sometimes some of the things I have to do and go like, why do you do that? Like, you could just be doing just the science. Yeah, I was like,
that's what it takes if it's going to work. If you don't care about whether it works, well, then that's fine.
It simplifies things.
And some folks get away with that, and okay, whatever, like that. But certainly I am. Well, I feel like I've made an arc going from wanting to be just egghead thinking thoughts, and even telling other people about it is barely my job, let alone actually making the world a better place because of it. And gradually over the years, I've started to realize that no, it's everybody's job. And if you've got something that you think is important and right, then it's on you. You have sort of parental obligation to try to get it out there, like that. So, I mean, so Vukosi, this is really interesting, and it sounds like your year away from reinforcement learning is going pretty well.
Yeah, it was. I did actually evaluate 1 year after, and I was like, oh, actually, I think I enjoy this. So I will see if I do have, I think, one student in reinforcement learning at the moment, with Benjamin Rossman at Wits University. So I'm at University of Pretoria. He's at Wits University. So and I'm back looking at education and personalization, reason reinforcement learning in that space. But yeah, the rest of the world has changed into just either natural language processing and just kind of thinking about data science in the hands of people who are not us.
Well, I guess if big tech is good for anything, it ought to be good for getting more voices out into more places. And so, Vukosi, I'm really glad you were willing to come and talk to us today about the state of things on the continent. It's interesting, and it's tons of work left to do, but it sounds like a lot of progress too.
Yep. Yeah, I think thanks for you and Michael for inviting me. I think this was great. Great to end this week.
Well, we're definitely fans. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing your stuff with us.
Yeah, and kind of like on that, like, you know, on that bombshell, ICLR is in Rwanda next year. So
Woo!
ICLR is where?
is
In
in Rwanda.
Rwanda.
Yeah.
Rwanda. Wow.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's kind of like coming full circle.
Full circle. Yeah, it's like it's not about bringing the big conferences to Africa.
But it's also about bringing the big conferences.
But guess what? Yeah.
We're bringing the big conferences.
Well, congratulations, Vukosi. Good work.
Yeah. It's on there. So it'll be very interesting. And I think the community is very much looking forward to interacting in Rwanda and seeing, that's like another place I go to a lot. Very good coffee. Very good coffee.
Good to know. All right. Well, so yeah, thanks again. Congratulations on all the great work that you're doing. Like I was saying, it was fascinating working with you because of your realistic optimism, right? The sort of idea that you were going to continue to be optimistic in spite of the fact that the world sometimes sucks. And I really respect that, because I think that requires the most energy, right? Just deluding yourself to being optimistic is good, but it's cheating, and you don't take the cheater's way out. You actually like see the world for what it is and still believe that it can be made better. So kudos, hats off to you, man.
Thanks.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.